Hey everybody, Professor Doom here. Welcome to installment number 2. There's probably going to be about 3 or 4 more of these coming up because there's a lot of interesting stuff to dive into here in the Danny Casolaro files. Again, I just want to reiterate that this presentation is not meant to be exhaustive. Again, I will state that there are other capable researchers out there who have already reported ad nauseum on quite a bit of this stuff. But I want to share with you an interesting aspect to all of this that I think went missing. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start with Mr. Frank Carlucci, whose name happens to be right here in Danny Casolaro's written notes. So what we need to do is we need to take a look at one more person, going back to our first presentation, Mr. Robert Keith Gray of Hills and Knowlton. If you guys have not seen my very first installment, take a look at that, because in there I show you a video clip of a young girl who was the daughter of the Kuwaiti U.S. ambassador, the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States' daughter. And she goes on to claim that she witnessed babies being taken out of incubators, which after that, George Bush, with a big lie on his face, was parroting exactly what this young girl was stating. And as the investigation ferreted out, that this was a propaganda hit piece that was done by Robert Keith Gray of Hills and Knowlton. Well, we're going to be taking a look at that. We're going to be taking a look at Robert Booth Nichols, Harold Okamoto, Frank Carlucci, and the connection to Wackenhut and exactly what was going on. Why was the drugs being brought over to the United States? Really, was it just to finance the Contras in their fight against the Sandinistas? No, it wasn't. Was the drugs coming over here and going to such individuals like Larry King so that he could blackmail the elites into child sex trafficking rings? Indeed it was. Was the cocaine making it to individuals like Craig Spence in Washington, D.C., so that he could blackmail politicians for Mr. William Casey of the CIA, so that William Casey would have all the goods on the politicians in case they ever got into his way of what he was doing with the Iran-Contra affair? Blackmail prevented anybody from being in these people's way. That's what the cocaine was being used for, but it also had another purpose. As the cocaine was being turned into crack cocaine and was flooding the streets of Chicago, St. Louis, in the states of Florida, Houston, and that's not a state, but Houston, Texas, New York, Los Angeles, Oakland. And do you know who was going to benefit from all of the low-level offenders that were going to be picked up on Mr. Ronald Reagan and, don't forget, George Bush Sr.'s crusade? What was their crusade? Tough on crime, tough on drugs, just say no. Isn't that what Miss Nancy Reagan said? Just say no. And look at all of the connections that we're going to see with Mr. Ronald Reagan and his connections to the La Cosa Nostra. Let's take a look at the connections between Wackenhut and their connections to organized crime. And then you'll understand why, when the drugs were being put on the streets, why they were being sold, and these low-level offenders were being rounded up. Guess who was profiting from their incarceration? That's right, none other than Wackenhut. Let's begin.
that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.
3 months after al-Sabah, she had been coached by the public relations firm Hill and Knowlton, which was working for the Kuwaiti government.
This book right here, we're going to take a look at just a couple of inserts right here. Dick Cheney and Frank Carlucci. So I just showed you Frank Carlucci, but I wanted to go back and touch upon Hill and Knowlton. And in case you missed it from the first segment, Robert Keith Gray was the chair of Hill and Knowlton, the all-powerful Hill and Knowlton, Washington-based lobbying firm, and he was a deputy director of communications in Reagan's 1980 presidential campaign. Gray reported directly to William Casey. Senator John DeCamp of the Franklin cover-up said that Robert Keith Gray was known to be Harold Anderson's closest friend in Washington. Robert Keith Gray was Harold Anderson's closest friend. Who is Harold Anderson? Well, you're going to have to wait until installment number 3 to hear more about Harold Anderson and how he plays a huge role as being not only George H.W. Bush's friend, but happens to be claimed by kids to have been involved in a child sex ring involving Larry King, the rising star, the black rising star in the Republican Party, who at a time in the 1980s when that would have been virtually unheard of, but yet he was elevated very quickly into the Republican Party for everything that he was doing. Larry King's Nebraskan homosexual pedophile ritual sacrifice ring. Gray is also reportedly a specialist in homosexual blackmail operations for the CIA. Okay? You know, for the life of me, I will never understand why Danny Casolaro, after looking at all of the evidence that he was compiling, that he didn't realize the viper's nest that he was stepping into, seeing all of the people that were dying, that were being killed to shut them up. And Danny should have seen these things. Well, if you realize exactly who some of these individuals were, believe me, now some of these people are either too old or no longer in existence for me to worry about them coming for me. And besides that, for the fact of where I'm at, if they can make it in here, then all the more power to them. But anyway, let us take a look at what Danny Casolaro wrote. Bob Nichols, or Robert Booth Nichols as he's known, part of the CIA, former CIA, has brother who's a lawyer. His ex-wife is in Hollywood. Arrangements. Harold Okamoto, who is Robert Booth Nichols' godfather, is a big Yakuza mobster who is stationed out of Hawaii and is involved in the casino concessions business. And he's also in the tobacco business. And he was also involved in running opium, heroin from the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon. And he was also working very closely with one Frank Carlucci, one in the same. And Frank Carlucci was not only part of the CIA as deputy director, but he went on to go into the Wackenhut Corporation. And who else was a part of the Wackenhut Corporation at one time? As the attorney of record, none other than William Casey, the director of the CIA. And isn't it interesting how many of these individuals were all Knights of Malta? Frank Carlucci, Oliver North, William Casey, Alan Dulles, just to name a few. The OSS that was converted into the CIA, Mr. Wild Bill Donovan, all of them members of the Knights of Malta. Let's take a little closer look at Harold Okamoto and Frank Carlucci, and then we're going to take a look at Robert Booth Nichols, at who he really is. But as far as going to the eastern part of Lebanon, unless you were connected with the drug trade, your chances were slim coming out unscathed. They built a network throughout the Bekaa Valley, and Robert Booth Nichols, who was under Harold Okamoto from the Hawaiian Islands, indeed, because Harold Okamoto is the godfather of Robert Booth Nichols. Harold Okamoto was represented to me as being as an intelligence person, which he is. He has worked under the auspices of Frank Carlucci for years. Carlucci was former CIA deputy director and former defense secretary. Apparently, Harold performed services for the U.S. government during World War II. He's of Japanese ancestry. I guess he was rewarded for services well done. Harold operates through a company called Island Tobacco Corporation. He has contracts for all the condiments of all the casinos in Atlantic City, Reno, and Vegas, and Macau. He's got contracts in Honolulu, the Orient, a couple of Jews he knows in Bangkok, and there is a casino. No, a city about 15 miles north of Beirut that Harold has his fingers in. When Fidco was wheeling and dealing on finances for the reconstruction of, and let's go into Danny Casolaro's files, and let's take a closer look at Fidco. And we're also going to take a little closer look at how Gary Webb's reporting about drugs landing on the streets of Los Angeles, California through the hands of Rick Ross, that Wackenhut was going to profit off of the incarceration of low-level drug offenders, that they were involved helping bringing the drugs over to make people into the addicts that they were going to profit off of imprisoning. Let's take a look at all of this. Before we take a look at Robert Booth Nichols and the whole Fidco Mafia Yakuza connection, let's take a look, in case you guys are unfamiliar with some of the CIA Knights of Malta connections. William Wild Bill Donovan, James Angleton, Chief CIA Counterintelligence, Knight of Malta. William F. Buckley Jr., the individual that was kidnapped in Lebanon and tortured to death. It was a part of the CIA. It was a CIA liaison officer, and he was kidnapped, and he was also Knights of Malta. Of course, George H.W. Bush, being a Skull and Bones and member of the Bohemian Grove, William J. Casey. Do you guys know that the Monsanto founder, Mr. Queenie, was also Knights of Malta? Henry Luce, Council of Foreign Relations and a CI officer, Knights of Malta. Kim Philby, British SIS. Alan Dulles. Reinhard Gillen. Clay Shaw from the JFK assassination investigation. Oliver North, John Poindexter, and it goes on, and now it's talking about a little bit that's not have to do with the Knights of Malta. Now, let us take a look at this. This is found in Mr. Danny Casolaro's notes. Wackenhut reported earnings for its March 31st, 1990 quarter in line with expectations, reaching 33 cents compared to 23 cents in the year earlier. Balance of the year, we looked for continued earning gains, although at a more moderate pace. The June 1989 quarter benefited from increased margin strike business and the start of new contracts in the quarter. We thus expect revenues to slow somewhat year over year from the gain of 18% in the first quarter. And going on right here, at Wackenhut's recent annual meeting, Mr. George Wackenhut, the company's chairman, indicated that the company's private prison business should reach $30 million in 1990, up from $18 million in 1989. How in the hell was it going to increase that much? How, when you have individuals that are members of the cabinet of Ronald Reagan, such as Frank Carlucci, who went into business with Wackenhut in the tough on crime, tough on drugs, and you're the ones bringing the drugs in and creating these addicts so that you could profit off their incarceration. And it's people like this who are running our country. People just like this. The corrections business is now profitable, and we look for the further improvement in 1990. The limiting factor will be marketing expenses that the division incurs as it pursues new business. Yes, when did the private business industry start? Why was it started? How did they know it was going to be so lucrative? How did they know that they were going to create so many incarcerated individuals? Because they were going to be part of the drugs coming into the United States, for them to have the clientele, to have the incarcerated individuals. It's the only way. That's why Danny Casolaro was looking at this. He knew what this was all meaning. Let's take a look at Danny Casolaro's files when it comes to Robert Booth Nichols right here. First Intercontinental Development Corporation, FIDCO. That's exactly, have you guys heard of FIDCO? Let's take a look at just some of these. This first document really just mentions the FIDCO as an entity, and the fact that George Pender was the president. All of these names are in Danny Casolaro's files. All of these names have been reported on by other competent researchers, and you can search this out. You can also look at all of the documents so that you can have an exhaustive view of what everything Danny Casolaro had been investigating. This is not exhaustive, as I've already pointed out. What is interesting in these documents, it talks about very, very interesting weapons that were going to be developed. We're talking about the railgun. We're talking about the super gun that was going to be worked on by a certain Mr. Gerald Bull. And Mr. Gerald Bull, after this after all of this it came crashing down, Gerald Bull went to go offer his services up to Iraq to create the super gun to shoot projectiles at long ranges that Iraq could use against Iran. But of course, because Israel was in fear that Iraq would turn those weapons onto Israel, a certain Michael Harari, who is an assassin Mossad agent, took out Mr. Gerald Bull in Brussels. And it is very interesting. We're going to take a look at another individual that reports on Mr. Michael Harari. Mr. Michael Harari, the Mossad assassin, has taken out American servicemen in the being connected with the the intelligence agency, the not the Secret Service, but the CIA, and was basically given a green light because of their connection to all of the shady deals that were going on to take out military servicemen. I'm going to show you that coming up after this. So this FIDCO, they were wanting to create an arms manufacturing plant at the Cabazon Indian Reservation, and it was going to involve a certain individual in the research and development department named Michael Riconosciuto, who appears to be some kind of genius that was also employed by a Mr. Vidnix from the Department of Justice through Mr. Robert Booth Nichols to take the promised software from Inslaw and recode it with a backdoor so that it could be sold not only to other countries around the world, but also be used, as I pointed out in my very first installment, that BCCI, Jackson T. Stevens of Systematics, the connection to the Arkansas and the Clintons and yada so on, and Yang Enterprises and Valdosta, Georgia. This promise software has been the destruction of many of people and has been the center of much investigation over the years. And Mr. Michael Riconosciuto is right there in the middle of all of this in so many different investigations. Assault rifles. Mr. Robert Booth Nichols signed. First Intercontinental Development Corporation. The principles of the corporations are as follows. Robert Mayhew was a part of the CIA. Kenneth Rowe, George Pender, Francis T. Fox, Clint Murchison, Robert Booth Nichols, William Pender, Michael A. McManus. Look up all of these individuals and you will see their connections to the CIA. Robert Booth Nichols' affidavit, right here. This is stated by him. These are all signed documents, as you can see. Robert Booth Nichols, Michael Riconosciuto, Meridian Arms. What are they going to create with this joint venture at the Cabazon Indian Reservation? This joint venture, $5 million down by joint venture partner with W.M. Frash to receive an equal percentage, so on and so forth. And let's go on. They're going to talk about Wackenhut coming up here in just a little bit. Here, take a look at what they're talking about right here. The understanding of their underlying energy transfer phenomena is clearly missed by the existing patents. Proprietary technology is not covered, and the applications are strictly limited in the control of field geometry, even though the results may be spectacular. We propose to outline technology in the form of patents applied for jointly with FMC to incorporate a total understanding of the phenomena involved, as well as a reduction to practice of generalized solutions. The technology which would be covered in the jointly applied patents would supersede all existing world patents in the field. Had we patented previously, it would only have announced our edge in this field and provided solutions to the problems of others in commercial development. When we are prepared to market, we will apply for protection under a comprehensive patent strategy. Okay, So now they're talking about certain types of weapons that haven't even, they're going to be created for the first time. We're talking about a rail gun. We're talking about certain kinds of fuel air explosives, which wasn't new, but the way to, not to detonate them, but the way to launch these devices, what they were working with, the rail gun, which is an electrical charged weapon that will discharge a projectile, and the projectile could be a fuel air explosive. But at the same time, the Gerald Bull and the super gun was doing the exact same thing, but where Bob Bickel was investigating the Iraqis because they were looking for certain neutron pulse guns for use in detonating nuclear explosives. And that's where Gerald Bull was going to come in. Anyway, you're going to see all of this written in these documents. And he's talking about the railgun right here. The application of perturbation theory to enhanced energy transfer. Second, the application of high voltage power supplies as associated control circuitry to enhance energy transfer. All of this, these are what they were developing through Meridian Arms and FIDCO, right here. As the program for which Meridian Arms Corporation was formed was not implemented, no physical assets were developed. The corporation was organized for the purposes of developing and producing a low-cost automatic weapon for the developing allied nations of the United States. See, all this. The G77 prototype is currently held by MAC under Class 3 Treasury permits. So on. All of these are listed in these documents here, okay? Going on. Let's see, technology exists with MAC for the production of high-grade N2O4 for the atmospheric nitrogen, fuel air explosives. Marine Arms Corporation has no liabilities, go on, so forth. This is the FIDCO Meridian Arms, blah, blah, blah. And he's talking about Michael Riconosciuto here. Tom, as you know, Mike's tried and true value is in the field of high voltage and electrostatics and their application. The meetings in San Jose highlighted application of this technology in over 100 areas that are in-house. They were using the Cabazon Indian Reservation for not just developing these weapons, but for testing these weapons as well. As to your question regarding demonstrations of Mike's ability to cool a steel plate, it can definitely be accomplished at your convenience. And he's talking about Michael Riconosciuto right here. And you know what's interesting? Going down, Vanderwerker. Let me see if I can remember exactly what was said here. I'm going all of this off of memory, everybody. So bear with me here. Glenn R. Shockley. And you know what's interesting in this folder here is that this stuff was provided to Danny Casolaro, and there was a certain note at the bottom when these were sent to Danny Casolaro that you're going to find quite interesting. Okay, hold on here. What is interesting is it wasn't just your conventional weapons. We're talking about biotoxin weapons. There's reports, Michael Riconosciuto's reported that there was Stormont Laboratories and DARPA were also involved at the Cabazon Indian Reservation when it came to creating these weapons. That they were experimenting with the human genome, and they could use certain type of viral weaponry that would affect certain and the only thing that I can think of, because he mentions DNA, is that, well, the whole mapping of the genome that we know of didn't really start, until the 1990s? And DARPA was already working with this stuff back in the 80s. And they were creating these bioweapons that could actually target certain DNA. And it's all mentioned not only by Michael Riconosciuto, but is alluded to here in some of these documents. Meridian Arms, Dr. Harry Fair, Tactical Technology. Okay. So, is there really a Dr. Harry Fair? Is in reference to the Wackenhut Services Inc. demonstration at Picatinny Arsenal and the point subsequently raised by Peter Zukowski, who's part of NATO, during the 120 millimeter combustible case discussions in your office. Here is Mr. Harry Fair. As you can see at this military site right here on armaments, and you go down there, Scorpion program, and then there's the Army's electromagnetic gun program. Mr. Harry Fair, Director, Institute for Advanced Technology, University of Texas. Interesting that that's what they were working on there, and they were bringing this, and Harry Fair happens to be working on this very technology years later, because that article was from 2007, the electromagnetic gun or the rail gun. And going on through here, so this, what you saw, this was, and it's the reason why I'm showing you guys all this is because of the fact of Robert Booth Nichols, who he is. And look at all of the connections that he has, not only to the Mafia, to the Yakuza, but also he's part of the CIA. And as you can see, Wackenhut employs a lot of individuals that are part of the CIA. They work with members of the CIA, and they're involved in underhanded CIA operations. And let me see. Hold on a second, because there's something I wanted to show you in here. Here he's talking in this section about the fuel-air explosives, talking about 0.6 controllable blast dispersion to manage the collateral damage problem, refers to controlling the initiation of an explosive in a time frame that is faster than the propagation speed of the explosive wave front. All very technical. There are two fundamental types of devices which can be built. Utilizing this technology, the first is a significant enhancement of the conventional air-fuel device. What is interesting is, why would they be doing this, and why would they be creating technology around an already existing banned, yes, you heard me right, banned technology? Because fuel-air explosives is a banned weapon. But what they were doing is they were revamping it, and they were recreating it in a completely different way on the Cabazon Indian Reservation, where it's a sovereign nation, and they can get away with doing it because there would be no federal government oversight on a sovereign nation such as an Indian reservation. It is all right here in the document. Okay. Here is the facts note that I wanted you to see that this guy said as he sent these documents to Danny Casolaro. Fax the cover sheet. Please forward the following 6 pages to Dan Casolaro. Thank you. And do you see underneath Danny Casolaro's name, there's some very hard to read writing that's encircled? Well, let's move up here because it gets bigger. And let me widen it for you. Danny Casolaro, that pesky reporter who won't stop till he gets the whole truth. Thank God. Hope he can't read this. Very interesting note. So the reason why this would be directed at Peter Zukowski, as I pointed out, Peter Zukowski is a part of NATO, and the letter was directed to him about their research and development activities at Cabazon regarding the fuel air explosive device. And this was the letter that was sent to Peter. I came across an envelope containing details of a fuel air explosive device. I believe you gave it to me in February, but I can't be sure I ever made comment on it. As you are aware, FAEs are banned in NATO, although most, if not all, countries, I should say, have been working on them for many years. The concept is not new, but the delivery mechanism and initiation have been shown to be the most difficult to design and operate in operationally acceptable manner. That is what they were working on Cabazon Indian Reservation, was the delivery system. Yes, the device that you propose is new or novel, but I believe that launch conditions will demand a much stronger container contain the fuel. Hence, the burst strength goes up, requiring a large charge to rupture and dispose. Bearing in mind the devices for use against second and third echelon forces long range is of paramount importance, and hence you are looking at ranges of 24 to 40 kilometers and muzzle velocities of the order of 820, 920 meters per second. 52 caliber ordnance with chamber capacities of the order of 22.9, 27.9 liters will give the device a softer ride, but such ordnances, whilst under design, may never be fielded, and hence launch conditions should be centered around the existing 39 caliber 155 millimeter tube. So now we're talking about Mr. Gerald Bull's super gun, okay? Danny Casolaro's files, you will find a sworn affidavit for a wiretap that is going to be not only commenced, but continued, because it's already been going on. And Thomas Gates is signing an affidavit that he needs the wiretaps to continue on certain individuals that are involved with La Cosa Nostra, particularly the Gambino family. And what is interesting about this is these individuals are in possession of a certain corporation called MCA, or that's what they operate. And MCA was the talent agency / Hollywood agency that gave Ronald Reagan his start in Hollywood, in acting. And it is very interesting that throughout this affidavit and afterward, that Thomas Gates testifies to the fact that in these conversations that they put a squash to Mr. Thomas Gates' investigations through the White House. Mr. Edwin Meese of the White House put a squash on the FBI's investigation of not only La Cosa Nostra, of the MCA Corporation, but a certain other individual that Thomas Gates was wiretapping at some of the same phone numbers involved with these Mafia members. Here. His name is Thomas Gates. I am a special agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. As such, I am an investigative law enforcement officer. And he goes on to state that he's been with the FBI, blah, blah, since 1981. And here, let's take a look at the other document. Right here. This affidavit is made in support of an application to continue to intercept for a period of 30 days wire communications over the telephone numbers of this number and that number located at that address in Los Angeles, California, of La Cosa Nostra member Martin Bacau, Eugene Gianquinto, Angelo Comito, Edward Ciandra, Michael Del Giazzo, Joseph Garofalo, and Robert Booth Nichols, and others yet unknown. In a lawsuit brought on by Bayou Management against Robert Booth Nichols, his wife, and Samuel Israel, which is very interesting because some of the information that came out in the deposition of Robert Booth Nichols got him killed. He was found dead with a hit on the head, and he was killed. They don't go on to state exactly how hard he was hit in the head, but they said he took a shot to the head and he died in his later years anyway. But for running his mouth in this deposition, and I'm just going to show you just part of what he says. And here is that videotape deposition of Robert Booth Nichols, taken by the plaintiff. Here. Just going to scroll down all this, and they're talking to Robert Booth Nichols. And this is just one very interesting, I don't want to take too long in all of this, but I'm going to show you exactly what he says right here. Deposition. Since the last year or so, Mr. Nichols, just to be clear, since you were 22 years or 23 years old to the present date, your primary way of making money was to be employed by people who came to be associated with government intelligence? That's correct. What was the next group of people? Let me take a look. Let's go to page 23. You know what? As a matter of fact, I want to get into this. Yeah, you know what? Because I want to remember all of this for prosperity reasons. Page 19. Well, I guess we'll step back more generally. Did these parties say they worked for a company or agency? Yes. What was the agency or company? One said the Central Intelligence Agency. Another said military intelligence. And others, I don't recall what particular. What did you do while working for these people? Achieved objectives that they set out for me. What were these objectives? Well, they were multiple. Do you want me to start with what I recall? Sure. The first one was when I first met them was to speak with a woman who stayed at the Surfrider Hotel and find out why she was in Honolulu and who she was seeing and have cocktails with her if possible. What was the next assignment after that? A Chinese woman that was in Honolulu that stayed at the Princess Kalani Hotel and to see who she was seeing and what she was doing. And how about the next one? A trip to Australia to see who was speaking to my best recollection and negative. When I say negative, to see who they felt were being anti-American interest in an area that was formerly an R&R location, Sydney, for U.S. forces. How did these people pay you? Cash. How much did they pay you? Well, different amounts each time. How much were you paid per year? It varied. I cannot say how much. Okay, let's go on. It depended on what the objective was. Sometimes they gave me $5,000. Sometimes they gave me money for overhead, travel, and I lived on the surplus. How much did they pay? You got to remember, everybody, I showed you the Meridian Arms document. Meridian Arms, Wackenhut, and the Cabazon Indian Reservation went into a joint venture not only to create weapons, but to test weapons. And Meridian Arms, FIDCO is what entered into the joint venture. Remember, Robert Booth Nichols was the owner and creator of Meridian Arms, which he started FIDCO with some of these CIA operatives to create weapons on a sovereign nation piece of land away from the prying eyes of congressional oversight. And this guy is giving up the goods as he goes along and did not realize that what he was saying was going to get him killed. Let's see, what was your next employer after these three individuals? That was withdrawn. let's see, just to be clear, you weren't not personally involved by any government agency at that time, correct? You can answer. Let me rephrase. Were you employed by a government agency at that time? I received funds from those that claimed to be with government intelligence. Did you think at that time you were an employee of government intelligence agency? I did not. I thought that I was a person that was facilitating their objective and they were paying for it. After you worked for several people who you just mentioned, what was your next employer? Pretty much throughout from that time to now, it's been the same type of relationship on and off. When I say now, I mean since the last year or so. And what I already read to you earlier. He says, I cannot put them in sequence. I cannot sequentially put my life with this type, with my involvements sequentially. So as you understand, Mr. Robert Booth Nichols was in the employ of the Central Intelligence Agency, whether they paid him to be an operative as an asset. He was still working for the CIA. The investigation that was being conducted by Mr. Thomas Gates of the FBI, where there was wiretaps that were involving Robert Booth Nichols, were squashed. If he was just a petty asset, why would you bother squashing an investigation into Robert Booth Nichols? Well, because there was other individuals involved. And Robert Booth Nichols was involved with those other individuals, as can be seen, because communications were going on between Robert Booth Nichols and parts of the La Cosa Nostra Gambino family, who had a hand in getting Ronald Reagan into the presidency. Well, at least help fund him. It was William Casey and parts of the CIA that paid money to Iran to hold hostages to ensure that Ronald Reagan got into the presidency. That's the whole basis of the Iran-Contra scandal reports, all of the journalistic reporting that's been going on about this very subject. Okay, Samuel Israel. So we're talking about, anyway, I've just shown you all that you need to know right there about Robert Booth Nichols. Let us move on to another interesting character by the name of Philip Arthur Thompson. And when we finish up with Mr. Philip Arthur Thompson, and we're going to look at some very interesting information about him, being a part of being a CIA asset, being a killer, an assassin, and you're going to see also another tie-in that is going to lead us into segment number 3. So this was an affidavit written by Michael Riconosciuto, the R&D guy that was involved with Robert Booth Nichols with FIDCO at the Cabazon Indian Reservation. I just want to point out that the name John Philip Nichols is not to be confused with Robert Booth Nichols. John Philip Nichols was the individual who went into the Cabazon Indian Reservation and set up a casino and facilitated the joint venture to happen between Wackenhut, FIDCO, and the Cabazon tribe. So don't confuse John Philip Nichols, but this is what Riconosciuto goes on to state. John Philip Nichols claimed that this was an authorized covert intelligence operation and the proceeds would be used to purchase George Wackenhut's yacht, called Top Secret. Military electronics equipment to be delivered to South Africa was also to be purchased according to John Philip Nichols and delivered by the yacht. I went along with the program because John Philip Nichols told me that the agency was involved through Wackenhut Security Industries. I did some checking on my own and became suspicious. Moving on down the line here. At this meeting, the details were plainly discussed by Mr. Arana. At that point, JPN directed to have Philip Arthur Thompson recover Ben Kalka's assets. I'm not going to get into who Ben Kalka is. I'll just give you a brief synopsis. Ben Kalka was involved in drug sales, and he was busted. And somebody that was associated with Michael Risciuto named Paul Maraska ended up being killed by Philip Arthur Thompson to obtain some money, stuff like that. Anyway, it's a big, long, convoluted story. But anyway, as it turns out, Philip Arthur Thompson happens to be a CIA asset, and you're going to look at the background now of Philip Arthur Thompson, and you're going to see that Danny Casolaro wrote his name down many, many times. Let's take a look at Danny Casolaro's notes real quick, and then we'll go take a look at some articles related to the very interesting character known as Philip Arthur Thompson. Here is his handwritten notes in an excerpt from what we just read about Michael definitely talked to Dr. Harry Fair at Picatinny. You saw those in the FIDCO documents of Robert Booth Nichols. I called Wackenhut. This is what Danny Casolaro is saying. Handwritten statement from Michael regarding Wackenhut. Philip Parath. That name was in the document that we just got done reading. Met with Wackenhut Sr. in Las Vegas. Philip Arthur Thompson. Ben Kalka's assets. Authorized covert action for. And then he writes his name down again with Ben Kalka. Philip Arthur Thompson lived in Guam. And just like Osama bin Laden had a CIA front name of Tim Osman, well, CIA also give code names to some of their asset operatives. And the code name that was found out for Philip Arthur Thompson was Jason. Jason, code name for Philip Arthur Thompson. And as you can see here, he wrote it again, and he's got it highly underlined. And at first, he thought maybe Philip Arthur Thompson was behind the murder of Fred Alvarez, the tribal member at the Cabazon Indian Reservation, who was making waves about the skimming of money from the casino by John Philip Nichols and company, and the fact that there was some secret weapons testing that was very shady indeed of all of the characters that were attending the Cabazon Indian Reservation. Well, Mr. Fred Alvarez wrote a letter to President Reagan, and he also went to a local Indio newspaper and claimed that his life was in danger behind what he knew. And, well, anyway, Mr. Fred Alvarez, his girlfriend, Mrs. Castro, and his friend, Mr. Boger, I can't remember all their names perfectly, but I do believe that's their names. And they all three were killed with gunshots to the head. And I do believe what Danny Casolaro was referring to here is that he believed that possibly Philip Arthur Thompson, being an assassin for the CIA, amongst being a serial killer and a Satanist, and a driver in the Nixon presidential campaign, yes, and ex-military Vietnam drug runner, that Philip Thompson, that's who we're going to be looking at right now. So as you will see, something very interesting about Philip Arthur Thompson, he was based out of San Francisco. And what do we know about San Francisco and the Presidio related to a certain Lieutenant colonel of the Army named Michael Aquino. And I do believe there is an association there, even though Danny Casolaro does not put two and two together there yet. He may. Arthur Thompson killed a woman by the name of Valerie McDonald. And this was all out of, pleasure for him. Of course, he was involved in murders for assassin for the CIA, but he was also convicted. He ended up being convicted many, many years later after attempts were made by the CIA to protect him in his murders, as you will see. Here is a drawing by Danny Casolaro, and you will see, I guess you won't. Okay, so it's kind of hard to, here, let me enlarge this here for you, and how Danny puts this all together. So Michael Riconosciuto, the chemist and electronics high IQ, connects to a Brian Weiss, who goes to the street to find out who killed his aunt. And the aunt is Karen, who is an informer, who ends up being killed because she's an informer by none other than Philip Arthur Thompson. The satanic cult killed somebody by the name of Mary Quick. It's going to be in here somewhere. But as you can look, Philip Arthur Thompson killed Paul Maraska. And he goes on, and here, let me just show you. Philip Arthur Thompson, killer and lover of Kathy Allen, who's part of the satanic cult and leader and a murderer. And according to this codename Jason, he's involved in 18 to 20 murders, some of them for the CIA, some of them for just robbery and dope, etc. And the San Francisco police and Fresno police, and we're talking, obviously, I bet you there's a connection with Mr. Michael Aquino in all of this. Agent Barnes of the FBI. Their son is heavy on speed. Tracy Barnes, friend of Karen. Okay, and let's look at the notes down at the bottom here. And here we'll see Mary Quick shot in the face by Kathy Allen and friends. San Francisco police question Brian about Paul Maraska murder. Ask about Michael Riconosciuto. Brian tells them about Mary Quick murder. And they tell Fresno PD. Fresno PD polygraphs Brian, picks up Karen, questions Kathy, and releases her on her own recognizance and with the gun and the jewels. How come? Well, if you consider who's all involved in this, Mr. Michael Aquino, I am sure, and the fact that Mr. Philip Arthur Thompson was a CIA asset assassin for them, and probably most likely Wackenhut, Tracy Barnes' sister, Agent Barnes' friend, blah, blah. Anyway, you get the idea. You get the idea of the kind of person he is. Now let's take a look at all of the information that we could find about Philip Arthur Thompson, his connection to the CIA, his murders, and his connection to satanic rituals. According to the friends of Valerie McDonald, of whom Philip Arthur Thompson killed. And that's just one female. There's another female by the name of Clower, Mrs. Clower, that he also killed. Let's take a look at these articles. Here are the known crime sprees involving Philip Arthur Thompson and his affiliation with Wackenhut and the CIA intelligence agency. Crime spree. 2000's murder trial, and he was found guilty finally in 2008 of the murder of Betty Cloer. She was working as a drug informant. And this is, obviously, because considering that the CIA was involved in bringing in drugs and maybe she was talking on the wrong person. And I bet you Betty Cloer was taken out at the CIA's behest. Ronald E. Winter murder in 1975. He was set to be a witness in a case involving weapons theft from Mather Air Force Base. The Arthur Sewell robbery in 1981, that Thompson employed Harlan Braun and his defense attorney in this trial. Note, I should say. Suspected crimes. Now, I will say that they do believe they have somebody now for the Zodiac killings. But what was interesting is there were a lot of speculations that I found all over the internet regarding Philip Arthur Thompson possibly being the Zodiac killer because he was in the locations at those times. And the time that Philip Arthur Thompson went to prison on a robbery charge, the Zodiac killing letters to the police stopped. That was some of the reasons why people believed, and there still is that possibility, that Philip Arthur Thompson could be the Zodiac killer. But they're claiming, anyway, that they have now the Zodiac killer. Valerie McDonald murder, which is very interesting because Valerie McDonald, she was living at these apartments that the three individuals, Abbott and Thompson and another guy, became the managers of the apartment. And she says that they had bowls and bowls and bowls of cocaine. And I bet you know where the cocaine came from, right? Considering he's a CIA asset, who do you think the cocaine came from? Yes. And that they were conducting satanic rituals, as you just saw in Danny Casolaro's notes about the satanic cult connection with Philip Arthur Thompson. Isn't it interesting that you have a Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, part of a satanic cult? You have the CIA employing an assassin with CIA, with satanic links to him, Philip Arthur Thompson. And then you have not only that, but you have a incident go on at Franklin, a cover-up in Nebraska, where kids were reported that they were being passed around as sex slaves in a child sex ring that was involving satanic ritual, and it involved people at the highest order. Now, we will get into the Franklin cover-up in the very next installment. But I just wanted to show you what this guy is all about. He's suspected of being the UC Davis sweetheart murderer. The male victim, John Riggins, was a paperboy for John Gordon Abbott, and a book of matches from British Columbia was found in the victim's van, leading police to suspect that Thompson's crowd had escaped prison and fled to Canada. Police later focused on Gerald Gallagher's brother David Hunt and his crew, but dropped all charges when DNA failed to match them. DNA ultimately identified Richard Hirschfeld, an airman at Mather, who some considered a shill for a larger group. Of course, we talked about the Paul Maraska murder. Intelligent Satanism involvement, political connections. He was involved as being a driver during the 1968 Richard Nixon campaign. Intelligence operatives that he was affiliated with, Louis Posada and John Gordon Abbott. Louis Posada was a part of Operation 40. This was a CIA suicide squad that was incorporated back in the Bay of Pigs days in the 1960s. And do you know, I want to show you a picture of Mr. Posada, Felix Rodriguez, Tosh Plumley, Ted Shackley, and Mr. Barry Seal. That Barry Seal, the drug runner out of Mena, Arkansas, all in a picture together, and all members of the assassin squad known as Operation 40. Isn't it interesting? There's a link between Louis Posada and Mr. Philip Arthur Thompson. And it appears as Philip Arthur Thompson is not only just a regular run-of-the-mill murderer, but he's also assassin for the CIA. And there was another group of assassins for the CIA known as Operation 40. It was a CIA-sponsored hit squad composed mostly of Cuban exiles. It was active in the United States and the Caribbean. Many researchers, Hopsicker, Mary Gorton, have pointed to Operation 40 involvement in JFK assassination. And let's take a look at some of the pictures down here with the members of Operation 40 right here. Peter Goss, Barry Seal, Felix Rodriguez, just to name a couple. Let's see who all the names that they mentioned down here. Tosh Plumley, William Seymour, and Barry Seal. God, look at that. Barry Seal, the fat guy, right there towards the, on your left-hand side, about 4 guys back. Excuse me. No, he's not. He's right there to the second guy to the left. Porter Goss is the first. Wait a minute, hold on. Let me see if I can remember the exact order it was. Let me see if I can remember here. Sorry, everybody. I don't want to lead you down the wrong path. This photo was taken in a nightclub in Mexico City, 1963. It is believed that the men in the photograph are all members of Operation 40. Closest to the camera on the left is Felix Rodriguez. Next to him is Porter Goss. And yes, I was right. Number 3 is Barry Seal. And then comes Tosh Plumley. And you're going to see all of these names mentioned in, of course, Danny Casolaro's files. Now, since we're talking about assassins here, isn't it interesting that Barry Seal makes his way from a photograph of Operation 40 all the way into Mena, Arkansas, running drugs for Oliver North and being protected by Bill Clinton? And Bill Clinton was being hoisted up into the presidential position by a man named Jackson T. Stevens. All that's interesting. But let's take a look at the assassin known as the Mossad agent, Michael Harari. So according to Lieutenant Colonel Cortulo, as we're going to look at a sworn affidavit from him before he was killed by Michael Harari, you will look at Mr. Danny Casolaro's notes, and it says at the bottom, Michael Harari is tied directly to the Barbuti affair and currently active events in Iraq ability to utilize American technology against American troops. He coordinated equipment and technology movements through South America tied to Wagon Hut development of fuel air explosive device, and he murdered Gerald Bull. Mr. Michael Harari. Here he is. Israel. Israeli spy and head of Mossad's Special Operations Division. And he left after a debacle happened This was a massacre happened. He was involved in the 1973 blah blah blah. 1972 Munich Olympics. You guys know about all that. And 5 of the Mossad agents were convicted after an accidental dude got shot and killed. In 1973, a young Moroccan waiter was walking home from the cinema with his pregnant wife in the tranquil Norwegian resort of Lillehammer when he was shot dead by an armed gang. Ahmed Bouchiki had been mistaken by agents of Israeli Secret Service, Mossad, for Ali Hassan Salema, whom they believed to have been a key figure in Black September, the Munich Olympics episode. 5 of the Mossad agents were convicted and jailed in Norway shortly after the killing took place, but their leader, Michael Harari, who has died at age 87, got away. Back in Jerusalem, Harari offered his resignation to Israel, but Golda Meir declined and turned it down. All right, so we're going to go back to Philip Arthur Thompson because there's a few things I forgot to mention about him as well. But we're going to come back and take a look at Mr. Cthulhu after we do that. I just wanted to show you there's these web sleuths that they were trying to put all this together regarding Philip Arthur Thompson, and they were putting him down for a couple of other murders as well from 72 and 75 and making connections there. They were attempting to. Whether this is absolutely gospel truth, that's hard to say. All I can tell you is that I know that he was a CIA asset who was involved in other murders, and he was involved for assassination for hire, basically for the CIA. So did the CIA know that he enjoyed killing people? Well, I know that he was in the military in Vietnam and was involved in the drug running back to the United States for the CIA. Those are in other documents as well. But it is interesting, they mention about all of this possibly being the Zodiac killer. They make their case for it. All that right here, they talk about his CIA connection. Let me see here. So these are the murders they were trying to tribute to Philip Arthur Thompson. Zodiac, Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, and the witchcraft murders. Now, you take a look at the whole story surrounding the son of Sam, and you kind of get the idea that there is a very distinct possibility that they could be onto something with some of these regarding this individual. On a particular webpage that I had to go all the way back to the web archive to get my hands on, Lawyers, Goons, and Money. A tale of the CIA cop killers and a dead wannabe actress, millionaire murderer. And goes on to talk about Valerie McDonald. You saw that name in Danny Casolaro's writing about Philip Arthur Thompson. She was one of those waitresses, albeit she'd only made it for as far south as a seedy $3 night North Beach apartment building overlooking San Francisco Bay. As you see, as I said, Philip Arthur Thompson was based out of San Francisco and Fresno during all of these satanic business. And I wonder if he was in the accompaniment of Lieutenant Colonel Aquino at any time. Okay, so going on right here. That was she lived at the Tower Apartments. That was until she crossed paths with the new building managers and a rhapsody hit some discordant notes. Philip Thompson, Michael Hennessy, John Gordon Abbott were ex-cons. Abbott was on work release for a 5 years to life sentence at San Quentin prison, and he'd met his mates on the inside. Thompson, 35, the oldest of the men, had been born at the tail end of World War II, and he cut his teeth shipping drugs and intrigue for CIA black operations during the Vietnam War. He's listed as a driver on the Nixon presidential reelection team for 1972. Thompson, however, had demons, plenty of them. On June 1971, at age in the 20s, Thompson took a 21-year-old mother named Betty Casolaro into a field east of Sacramento, beat her, raped her, then shot her 3 times before bludgeoning her face beyond recognition. And she was the informant, remember? Okay. Clowers' nude corpse was found by 2 young girls horse riding the next day. She left behind a 5-year-old son. Go on. Nobody had connected Philip Thompson to this unspeakable crime, and so he continued doing spook work for the CIA and sometimes the FBI, interspersed with prison time for armed robberies and violence. Just in passing, he was finally caught for his 1971 murder in 2003 after a DNA check on cold cases located his DNA on Betty Calora's underwear. He was tried and convicted of murder in 2008 in a history-making California court case 30 years after the killing. So in here, you're going to see, here he is, right here, Philip Arthur Thompson. And what is interesting, they goes on to state that Mrs. McDonald told friends before she was taken, she was scared of these guys. They had bowls and bowls of cocaine, and they are also involved in satanic rituals. That's what she says. And it's in here somewhere. I'm not going to, hold on, let me see if I'll find it here, because I just want you guys to have the evidence. Here, under the picture, to the left, some of the tenants in rearranging rooms after they began evicting them. Valerie McDonald feared for her safety. She told her friends she'd seen the men organize parties where bowls of cocaine were available and that satanic activities had taken place. And she told her friends she was frightened. And there you have it. If this is indeed a relative, and if so, does the apple fall far from the tree? Michael Harari was involved in every aspect of the drug running, child kidnapping, murders, and this guy right here, Mr. Yuval Noah Harari, a relative?
Now, in the past, many tyrants and governments wanted to do it, but nobody understood biology well enough. And nobody had enough computing power and data to hack millions of people. Neither the Gestapo...
He's not. It's just got to be bad enough. You know where he's from. I'm not going to say the J word. I'm not going to say the I word. I'm just going to say that out of all we've seen, nothing is going to turn out good with anything this guy has to say or any of the people that he works with. So we'll just let that stand where it's at. But going back really quick to Michael Harari and the fact that not only was he an assassin for Israel's Mossad, but he was also killing American citizens indiscriminately to keep secret all of the inner workings of the drugs that were flowing into the United States. Here is the sworn affidavit from Mr. Colonel Cutullo. Several years ago, Colonel Cutullo obligated me to bring the enclosed affidavit forward in the event of his death. In 1980, Colonel Cutullo died in an accident while on military exercise. Just prior to his death, he notified me that he was to meet with Michael Harari, an Israel Mossad agent. It is my belief, though unsubstantiated, that Harari murdered Colonel Catullo because of the information Catullo possessed. In the event of his death, I was told to discreetly contact Colonel Baker, which I did. And I believe that Colonel Catullo died in his attempt to prove that Operation Watchtower was not sanctioned by the proper authorities. But it was. Colonel Rowe discreetly inquired about the mission of Task Force 157 in February of 1989 and the exact role of Wilson in that task force. Colonel Rowe was curious to learn whether or not the Israeli intelligence network in Latin America or the Middle East played any role in the task force. Colonel Rowe was specifically inquiring as to whether or not Michael Harari or David Kimchi, another Mossad assassin, were named as parties involved in this task force. I believe this February inquiry by Colonel Rowe tipped off Harari, who then murdered Colonel Rowe to keep him from asking questions. He told me in our last telephone conversation that he would be receiving the documentation necessary to show that Wilson and Harari had known each other. After that call, Colonel Rowe was murdered. Go through the whole thing. You get it. There are other individuals in this affidavit. Catullo was killed. Rowe was killed. 2 other individuals were killed. A person by the name of Tyree sits in prison for the murder of his wife for a murder he didn't commit. Catullo admits that he let this guy hang in the wind because it would have exposed Operation Hightower. Is it Hightower or Watchtower? Watchtower. Excuse me. Watchtower. Let me back that up. Watchtower. And Watchtower was all about setting up these signals so that drugs could flow down into Panama so that they could make their way back into the United States. Can you imagine some guy sitting on death row and you can't help him out? Well, anyway, the fact is Mr. Tyree, I don't know if he's dead now. I don't know. But this affidavit did not get him out of prison. Mr. Catullo was killed, most likely by Michael Harari. Michael Harari killed Gerald Bull in Brussels. He killed all the other individuals because he was involved with the CIA during this operation to bring drugs from South America into the United States. So somehow Israel was also making money off of this whole operation. Okay, that is the deal. In the very next segment, we are going to take a look at a certain connection to an individual that we know in the spotlight here in the past few years, in say 2019, and see if there is a connection between the Franklin cover-up out of Nebraska. And we're going to take a look after the Franklin, Nebraska cover-up, Franklin Credit Union. We're going to take a look at the individual that was kidnapped, Mr. Johnny Gosch. And then we're going to look at what became of him, most likely. And we're going to take a look at Craig Spence out of Washington, D.C., and Henry Vinson, the other call boy service provider out of Washington, D.C., if anybody has heard of him. All right, everybody. Thanks.